At Le Bernardin, beneath chandeliers that made every glass on every table look as if it had been carved from winter and lit from inside, my son-in-law lifted a grey plastic bus tub full of restaurant leftovers over my head and poured it slowly enough for the whole room to understand that it was not an accident. Cold fish bones struck my hair first, then slid across my forehead. Lemon butter ran down the bridge of my nose. A strip of wilted grains stuck to my cheek. Wine-dark sauce spread over the lapels of my charcoal suit and soaked through the collar of my white shirt until it touched the skin beneath. Bread crusts, half-chewed vegetables, something sweet and rotten with cream, and the sour smell of food scraped from other people's plates fell over me in a thick, wet collapse. Marcus Harrison smiled as he emptied the last of it, holding the container upside down for one unnecessary second after it was already empty, and in that second I understood that the cruelty was not the spill. The cruelty was the pause. He wanted me to sit inside it. He wanted the dining room to see me sitting inside it. He wanted my daughter to see him make me small and approve. "That is what you deserve," he said, his voice low but perfectly clear, polished by wine and ego and years of borrowed authority. The dining room went silent so suddenly that the silence itself seemed like part of the service, as if some invisible captain had lifted a hand and ordered every table to stop breathing. Silverware froze above plates. A waiter at the far wall held a tray so still that the stemware on it did not tremble. A woman near the window pressed 2 fingers against her lips, not to help me, not to object, but to hold in the sound that manners had failed to prevent. Warm liquid crawled behind my ear. Something oily slid under my collar. I smelled lemon, truffle, old wine, cold fish, butter, perfume, and humiliation. And across from me, wearing her dead mother's pearls around a throat I had once kissed when she was a feverish child afraid of thunder, my daughter Isabella did not stand. She did not cry out. She did not say my name. She looked at me through the same blue eyes she had inherited from Alina, but without Alina's mercy, without Alina's instinctive horror at cruelty, without even the polite reflex a stranger might have offered. She looked at the food on my face and then at Marcus, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that perhaps only our table heard it, which somehow made it worse. "He is right, Dad." She did not say it in anger. Anger would have been human. She said it with the exhausted certainty of someone confirming a conclusion reached long ago. "It is time you learned your place. I should have known before the bus tub. That is one of the punishments of betrayal. Afterward, every small sign returns to you with its hands full of evidence. I should have known from the invitation itself, because Isabella had not invited me anywhere for pleasure in years. She summoned me when she wanted something, a signature softened by dinner, an introduction hidden behind family conversation, reassurance presented as concern, money wrapped in language about transitions, access disguised as inclusion. When she called 3 days earlier, I had been standing in the Westchester kitchen near the long window that looked over the back lawn, watching afternoon light settle on the hydrangeas Alina planted 22 years before she died. Their heads drooped in the late August heat. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the faint tick of the old clock above the pantry door, a clock Isabella had once painted badly in elementary school and insisted we hang anyway because she wanted time to know her colors. I kept it there after the paint chipped, after she moved out, after Alina passed, after the kitchen became a room where I drank coffee alone and listened to memories pretend they were footsteps. When Isabella's name appeared on my phone, something in me lifted before caution could stop it. That is what children do to parents, even when they have earned suspicion. They return you for one foolish second to hope. "Dad," she said, and her voice was sweet in the way frosted glass is bright, all surface and no warmth. "Marcus and I were thinking we should have a proper dinner together. Somewhere nice. It has been too long." I looked toward the empty chair where Alina used to sit with her crossword and coffee, one eyebrow raised whenever Isabella used too many soft words. In my mind, I heard my wife's voice exactly as it had been when she was alive, dry and affectionate and impossible to fool. "What does she want, Charles?" I almost smiled, but grief has a way of stopping a smile halfway, especially when the person who would have shared it is gone. I asked, "What is the occasion?" Isabella laughed lightly, too lightly. "No occasion. Family should not need an occasion." A better father might have accepted that sentence and thanked God his daughter wanted dinner. An honest father hears the spaces between words. "Where did you have in mind?" "Le Bernardin," she said, and there was the first glint of metal under the velvet. She chose restaurants the way lawyers choose venues. Prestige as pressure, elegance as weapon. A public room where my refusal would seem unreasonable, and her request, Whatever it turned out to be would be lacquered in good manners. Tuesday at 7:30. Marcus already made the reservation. Already. Not would you like to come? Not are you free? Already. I said yes anyway because I was her father. Because loneliness can make caution negotiable. Because some part of me still believed a meal could become a bridge if I walked onto it gently enough. My name is Charles Whitmore. I am 64 years old. By the time that dinner happened, I had already spent more than half my life learning that buildings tell the truth more readily than people. A building will show stress if you know where to look. Hairline cracks near a cornice. Water stains beneath a window. A lobby renovated too often to hide what the plumbing keeps confessing. People are more elaborate. They cover rot with charm, debt with silk, fear with contempt, and greed with the language of family planning. I built Whitmore Development from a loan so small it would not buy a decent parking space in Manhattan now, then grew it over 40 years into one of the most quietly powerful real estate holding companies in New York. Quietly is the important word. Loud wealth attracts hungry men. Quiet wealth lets hungry men reveal themselves. I learned that after enough deals, enough dinners, enough smiling men who called me a visionary while searching my face for weakness. I owned commercial blocks through layered entities, held residential portfolios through family companies, financed law firms, rescued developers, bought distressed properties before they became fashionable, and kept my name out of gossip pages because fame is only useful to people who need strangers to complete them. Publicly, after Alina died, I retired. Privately, no major acquisition moved without my review, no refinancing of importance closed without my eye, and no partner who had mistaken my silence for absence kept that mistake for long. Isabella did not know the full scope. I told myself I protected her from it. That was partly true and partly vanity. She knew I had done well. She knew we had never worried about money. She knew her schools, her wedding, her apartment, her clothes, her charities, her mistakes, and her emergencies had always been handled before they could truly damage her. But she did not know that the Fifth Avenue apartment she and Marcus described to friends as ours was held by a Whitmore subsidiary created on a rainy afternoon when she called me 13 years earlier, newly married, sobbing because the apartment they wanted was out of reach, and Marcus refused to begin married life in some starter box. In Queens, she did not know that Marcus's law firm survived the 2008 collapse because David Caldwell, my college roommate, called me in a voice stripped of pride, and I wired $2 million under terms so gentle that his partners later called it luck. She did not know that 3 of Marcus's largest clients arrived at Coldwell Hartman because I made quiet introductions and allowed my son-in-law to stand near the door while gratitude passed through it. She did not know that Bernardin sat in a building whose ground lease crossed a holding company I could influence with a phone call. She did not know because I wanted to believe that love uninformed by wealth was purer than love tested by it. The tragedy is that ignorance did not preserve love. It exposed what had replaced it. The part I rarely speak about is the month before Le Bernardin, because it reveals that the dinner was not a sudden break in the family structure. It was the visible collapse of a structure already rotted through. In that month, Isabella began calling more often, but the calls never arrived clean. They came wrapped in small emergencies that were not emergencies at all. The apartment's building board was becoming impassable. Marcus was under unfair pressure at work. The Westchester house insurance renewal was wasteful and proof I needed someone younger to manage things. A charity consultant told Isabella that donors responded better to legacy narratives, and she wondered whether I might attend an event and speak briefly about Elena, though when I asked what the money would support, she said the committee was still refining the mission. I heard Elena in my head again. What does she want, Charles? But I answered the calls anyway. One afternoon, Isabella visited Westchester with Marcus and spent 20 minutes walking through the rooms, as if measuring them with her eyes. She paused in the dining room, touching the back of Elena's chair. "This table is too large for one person," she said. "It was never just a table," I replied. Marcus looked at the ceiling medallion and said, "You could get a fortune for this place if you staged it properly." Isabella corrected him softly, not because the comment was offensive, but because it was premature. "We are not talking about selling today. I remember that word with perfect clarity. Even then, the calendar in her mind had already moved ahead without me. That same afternoon, Marcus asked to see my study. He pretended interest in the old architectural drawings framed along the walls, but his eyes moved to the file cabinets, the locked credenza, The leather boxes where I kept personal records. You still keep paper files, he said. How charming. Paper does not change passwords when a vendor updates terms. He smiled, missing the point. You should digitize. Isabella and I could help. It would be safer. Control often arrives wearing the language of safety. I told him Patricia handled my records. Patricia will not be around forever, he said. I looked at him then, and for a second I saw the impatience beneath his polish. The son-in-law tired of waiting for old systems and old men to move aside. Isabella appeared in the doorway before I answered. Marcus, she said. He turned and something passed between them. Not surprise. Coordination. Later, after they left, I opened the study window and stood there listening to their car disappear down the drive. And I knew I should call James. I did not. That delay was mine. 2 weeks later, Isabella invited me to lunch at a private club, where she wanted to introduce me to a transition consultant. The consultant was a woman named Meredith Vale, younger than Isabella but dressed older, with a voice trained to make intrusion sound like compassion. She spoke of aging in place, succession clarity, family asset harmony, elder autonomy, and managed transition. Each phrase was an upholstered version of removing me from the center of my own affairs. I let her speak for 16 minutes before asking who retained her. She blinked. Isabella shifted. Marcus, who had come along though Isabella described it as just lunch, said, "We thought it would be helpful." "Who is we?" I asked. The table cooled. Meredith smiled. "Mr. Whitmore, many families find that bringing in a neutral professional can reduce tension. Neutral professionals send engagement letters." I turned to Isabella. "Who signed hers?" Isabella's face tightened. "Dad, why are you making this hostile?" "Because someone at this table is using professional language to discuss my assets without my consent." Meredith closed her folder slightly. Marcus lined in. "This is exactly why we need help. You hear concern as attack." I looked at my daughter. "Is that what you think?" She held my gaze for a moment, then looked down. "I think you are not as open as you believe." That sentence followed me home harder than it should have, because under the insult lay a shard of truth. I had not been open. I had been quietly controlling too, hiding the full architecture of wealth, deciding what everyone could know, staging generosity from behind curtains. But there is a difference between privacy and dispossession. Isabella no longer seemed to see it. The final warning came from Patricia. 3 days before Le Bernardin, she entered my office holding a folder, her face composed in the way that told me she was angry enough to become formal. "I apologize for bringing this to you," she said, which meant whatever she carried had crossed a line. Inside the folder were copies of inquiries made to 2 estate attorneys and 1 private wealth management firm by someone identifying herself as a family representative for Charles Whitmore. Isabella's name did not appear, but her assistant's email had been used in 1 inquiry before being replaced by a generic address. The questions were careful. What standards apply when an aging parent is unwilling to transfer management authority? What evidence supports limited capacity concerns? What structures preserve family assets while respecting a senior principal's dignity? I read the pages twice. Patricia stood in silence. "How did you get these?" "One of the firms has worked with us. They thought the inquiry was odd." "Odd, predatory," she said, then immediately looked regretful. Patricia had known Isabella too long to enjoy saying it. I closed the folder. "Send copies to James." "I already did." I looked up. "Good." She hesitated at the door. "Mr. Whitmore, forgiveness is admirable, but preparation is kinder to the person who may have to be strong later." That was Patricia's way of saying what Elena would have said more sharply. "Do not wait for the knife to prove it is sharp." Even after that, I went to dinner. That is what I want understood. I had evidence. I had warnings. I had James preparing documents. I had Patricia's folder. I had the transition consultant's polished ambush. I had Marcus's eyes in my study. Still, I went, because fathers are not rational where daughters are concerned. I told myself perhaps the dinner was an apology. Perhaps Isabella had realized the consultant went too far. Perhaps Marcus wanted to repair things after the estate inquiries. Perhaps Elena's pearls around Isabella's throat would remind her of something better. Hope does not always look bright. Sometimes it looks like an old man adjusting his tie in a town car, preparing to give love one more chance to behave like love. On Tuesday evening, I was 7 minutes late. Traffic on the west side highway had thickened into that slow metallic exhaustion particular to Manhattan, and as the town car crawled south, I watched my reflection in the darkened window. I had chosen a charcoal suit Elena once said made me look like the reasonable man in a room full of predators, and a navy tie Isabella gave me for Father's Day 6 years ago, back when she still remembered without needing an assistant to send a reminder. I adjusted the knot 3 times, though it was already straight. My hip hurt from an old fall on a construction site, and I worried absurdly that Marcus would notice me favoring one side when I stood. There are humiliations fathers rarely confess. One is that no matter how cruel a child becomes, some chamber inside you still dresses for their approval. I arrived under the restaurant awning and stepped into air scented with polished wood, flowers, expensive wine, and the subtle chill of rooms where everything is controlled before guests feel anything. The host checked my name and led me through the dining room. I saw Isabella before she saw me. She sat angled slightly away from the empty chair, one hand moving across her phone, Elena's pearls resting at the hollow of her throat. I had given them to her on her wedding day, in a private moment before the ceremony. She had cried then, really cried, pressing the strand against her chest. "I wish Mom were here," she whispered. I said, "She is." I believed it then because fathers are sometimes allowed beautiful lies. Marcus saw me first. He leaned back and lifted his glass, not in greeting but acknowledgement, the way a man recognizes an appointment he intends to control. Marcus Harrison was 41, handsome in the practiced, maintained, slightly resentful way of men who work hard on surfaces and call it discipline. He had a jaw he angled toward mirrors and enemies, dark hair silvered only at the temples because he paid someone to make time look tasteful, and a smile that always arrived carrying a second meaning. "Charles," he said. He had called me Charles from the beginning, even before marrying Isabella, even before I had allowed him enough proximity to earn informality. "Good of you to make it." Isabella looked up then, no kiss, no outstretched hand, no apology for beginning without me. "Dad, you are late. Traffic," I said. I lowered myself into the chair, carefully enough to hide the hip. Marcus noticed anyway. His eyes flicked down, then back up. "You should have the driver use the east side next time. Less sitting, better for circulation." He said it as advice, but the word circulation carried the faint smell of age. Isabella gave the smallest smile into her wine. A waiter appeared immediately. "Good evening, sir. May I offer you something to drink? Water, please." Marcus rolled his eyes just enough. "Come on, Charles. We are at Le Bernardin's. Order wine. You can afford one glass, I assume." Isabella murmured, "Marcus, not a reprimand, a decoration." I smiled at the waiter. "Water is fine." The waiter withdrew. Marcus swirled his wine and said, still disciplined, "I see. Some habits stay useful, or limiting." He laughed softly as if the word were harmless. I folded my napkin in my lap and reminded myself that the evening had not yet become what I feared. A man can spend decades making excuses for the people he loves. He can build entire shelter systems inside his mind. Marcus is insecure. Isabella is stressed. They are ambitious. They are young, though they were not young anymore. They mean well. They are trying. They are family. Every excuse is a small loan against dignity. The interest accumulates quietly. For the first 20 minutes, the meal pretended to be normal. Marcus described his partnership committee meeting at Caldwell Hartman and Associates with the lazy confidence of a man accustomed to repeating victories someone else arranged. "The Pemberton account is expanding again," he said, glancing at me as if I should be impressed by a name I had brought to David Caldwell over bourbon in 2012. "Institutional clients like that require a different kind of handling. You cannot just be transactional. You have to understand networks. Networks are useful," I said. "Relationships are better," he smiled thinly. "That is very old school." Isabella leaned toward him, touching his wrist. "Marcus is excellent at relationships." She looked at me then, perhaps expecting approval. I nodded because it was easier than saying that Marcus was excellent at entering rooms through doors opened by other men, and then claiming he built the building. Isabella discussed her gala committee, correcting the word volunteering when I used it. "I am not volunteering, Dad. I am chairing strategy." "Of course," I said. "That sounds important." "It is important." She watched my face for something to criticize and found it. "Do not say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you are humoring me." I had spent 40 years negotiating with men who threatened lawsuits, strikes, and capital withdrawal, yet my daughter could still make me examine a single tone until I felt guilty for breathing. "I did not mean to." "You never mean to," she said, and Marcus smiled into his glass. The first true pressure cycle began after the appetizers. A waiter removed plates that had barely been touched, and the brief choreography of service gave us 30 seconds of neutrality. Marcus waited until the waiter stepped away. Then he placed both elbows on the table, violating the room's elegance with deliberate casualness, and said, "Charles, Isabella and I have been talking about your situation." My situation. The phrase arrived dressed in concern and smelling of paperwork. I looked at Isabella. She had put down her phone and arranged her face into softness. The expression was familiar because she used it when asking for something she believed she could not demand outright. "Dad, we worry about you," she said. "That house is enormous. All those stairs, the grounds, the maintenance. You are there alone. I have help. Staff is not companionship." I did not claim it was. Marcus tilted his head. "But surely you see the issue. At a certain age, independence becomes more symbolic than practical." I met his eyes. "At a certain age, you know what I mean. I am interested in hearing exactly what you mean." Isabella exhaled through her nose. "Dad, do not make this adversarial. You brought up my situation in a restaurant, because if we brought it up at home, you would retreat into memory." There it was, the accusation beneath her concern. Grief as obstruction, love as inefficiency. Marcus leaned back and took over, because control always returned to him if the room allowed it. "There are exceptional senior communities now. Full service, private dining, medical staff, social calendar, transportation. Not nursing homes, luxury residences. You would be safer, more engaged, less isolated." "I am engaged. With whom?" he asked. The question sounded almost amused. "Your housekeeper, your driver, James Morrison." Men your age confuse routine with community. Isabella watched the tablecloth. She did not like the bluntness, perhaps, but she did not stop it. "The Westchester house," she said carefully, "could be put to better use." "Better use?" "Yes," she lifted her eyes. "Marcus and I have outgrown the apartment. We want to start thinking about the next phase. A family trust could own the house. We could manage it. You could have a beautiful place with care, and we could make sure the property stays in the family." I looked at the pearls. I wondered if she felt their weight. "Your mother chose every curtain in that house," I said. "She planted the rose garden herself." Isabella's jaw tightened. "Mom has been gone 15 years. The sentence did not sound cruel until it entered me. "I know exactly how long your mother has been gone." She looked away. Marcus sized the opening. "Sentimentality is not a plan. Elena would not want you trapped in a mausoleum." I felt my hand close around the water glass. "Do not use my wife's name to sell me out of my home." Marcus's smile disappeared. Isabella's head snapped up. "Dad, one word. Warning. Shame. Demand." The child correcting the parent, because the parent had stepped outside the role assigned to him. The pressure released when the main course arrived. That is how emotional violence works in polite rooms. A waiter appears with fish, and everyone pretends plates can cover the wound. The restaurant's machinery moved around us with exquisite discipline. Silver domes lifted, sauces poured, wine refreshed. For 5 minutes, nobody said the house. I almost convinced myself the worst had passed. Marcus asked the waiter a question about preparation. Isabella took a photograph of her plate from a flattering angle. I tried to eat and found my mouth too dry. Then Marcus began the second cycle, lighter in tone but heavier in intent. "I was telling someone at the firm about your real estate days," he said. "They were fascinated, were they?" "Yes. Small residential acquisitions, right. Brownstones, conversions, long holds. Must have been a wonderful time to be in the market. Fewer regulations, less competition. Buy, wait, win." I set down my fork. "No market is simple if you are risking your own capital." "Of course," he smiled, "but scale changes things. Corporate practice, institutional clients, billion-dollar transactions. There is a different pressure." I looked at Isabella again. She had gone still, but not because Marcus offended her. She was waiting to see whether I would embarrass her by defending myself. "Pressure is not measured only in transaction size," I said. "Sometimes it is measured by whether payroll clears on Friday." Marcus gave a soft laugh. "That is very charming." Isabella said, "Dad, please do not turn this into one of your old business lectures." He asked. He was making conversation. "No," I said. He was making hierarchy. The word landed harder than I expected. Marcus's face cooled. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, stood, and said, "Excuse me." For a moment, I believed he was leaving the table to regain composure. That belief lasted until I saw where he went. Near the service station, bus staff had set down a gray container of scraped plates. It belonged behind doors, out of sight, in the unseen underworld where luxury sheds evidence of appetite. Marcus approached it with that smiling confidence wealthy customers use when asking staff to violate procedure. A young server moved uncertainly, said something I could not hear. Marcus replied, perhaps joking, perhaps commanding. The server hesitated. In that hesitation, the entire disaster became possible. Marcus lifted the bus tub. Isabella frowned. Marcus, she said, but softly, not with fear. What are you doing? He came back toward the table. Diners began turning. A manager at the far side of the room noticed too late. Marcus's eyes were bright now, charged with the pleasure of spectacle. Your father needs a lesson, he said. I remember the angle of his wrist. I remember the grey lip of the tub passing above the white tablecloth. I remember thinking, with ridiculous clarity, that the suit was one Alina like. Then he poured. Afterward, people asked whether I felt rage. I did not at first. Rage requires the mind to accept the event quickly enough to respond. My mind refused. It sorted details. A fish bone caught in my hair, sauce on the cuff, the cold weight spreading across my shoulders, the smell, the silence, Marcus's smile, Isabella's voice. He is right, Dad. It is time you learned your place. That sentence entered a chamber in me where I had stored every excuse, every payment, every rescue, every late-night transfer, every silence after an insult, every self-betrayal I called fatherhood. And the chamber did not explode. It emptied. That was worse. One moment it held years of pleading hope. The next it held nothing but decision. I reached for the napkin. My fingers were steady. I wiped my eyes first, because I wanted to see my daughter clearly one final time before the old version of us ended. She looked away only when she realized I was not pleading. Cowards can endure a victim's pain. They struggle with a victim's composure. I took my phone from my pocket. Sauce had reached the edge of the case. I unlocked it with my thumb and called James Morrison. He answered on the second ring. Charles, he said. I could hear in his voice that he had been at dinner too. Perhaps somewhere peaceful, perhaps with a glass of red wine, perhaps with grandchildren. Execute the documents, I said. All of them. Tonight, he did not ask what happened. That is why I trusted him. Are you certain? Yes. Then I will begin immediately. I ended the call. Marcus was no longer smiling quite as broadly. Public humiliation had been fun when I was silent. Consequences, though still invisible, had entered the room. I stood. A waiter appeared with towels, pale and horrified. Sir, please let us help. No, I said gently. You are not responsible for what happened at this table. The manager was approaching fast now, face bloodless. I turned to Isabella and Marcus. Marcus opened his mouth, perhaps to make one last joke, but found no safe tone. Isabella stared at the table. Enjoy your dinner, I said. I suspect it will be the last expensive one you have for a while. Then I walked through the room, wet food sliding down my jacket, every eye following, and stepped into the Manhattan night. Outside, the city did not care. That was almost comforting. Cars moved. A bicycle courier cut between taxis. Someone laughed under an awning. The doorman of a nearby building glanced at me, took in the ruin of my suit, and looked away with professional mercy. I stood beneath the restaurant's entrance lights and breathed cold air through the smell of garbage in my hair. I expected to feel destroyed. Instead, beneath humiliation and grief, beneath the image of Isabella's pearls above the table, I felt something thin and clean. Not triumph, not yet. Freedom often arrives first as nausea. I had spent years fearing the loss of my daughter. On that sidewalk with sauce drying at my collar, I understood that the loss had already happened. I had only continued paying to avoid receiving the notice. At home, after the driver said nothing and Patricia called twice, and I ignored both, I showered until the hot water ran almost cold. I scrubbed my hair once, twice, 3 times. The smell left. The memory did not. I placed the ruined suit in a garment bag instead of throwing it away. I do not know why then. Later I would. In the bedroom, Alina's photograph watched from the dresser. She wore a white blouse, her hair lifted slightly by wind, her face still round with health. I failed her, I said, though whether I meant Isabella or Alina I was not sure. The house answered with old wood settling in the walls. I slept 3 hours and dreamed of my daughter at 8 years old, running across the lawn during a thunderstorm because she believed I could stop the sky. By 7 the next morning, I was in James Morrison's office. He occupied the top floor of a Wall Street building I had once helped him acquire at a price so favorable he still claimed he owed me interest in this life and the next. James was 68, thin as a blade, sharp-eyed, with the emotional discipline of a man who had spent a career watching heirs become wolves at mahogany tables. He did not waste time with outrage. Outrage in his profession was for people who had not prepared documents. "Before you sign," he said, opening the thick folder we had built over 6 months under the bland title of a state review, "I am going through consequences again. You may stop at any point before execution. Proceed. First, Isabella Whitmore Harrison Discretionary Trust. Current value 5.2 million. Monthly distributions of 15,000 cease immediately under the conduct and values clause. Remaining assets revert to your estate, then into the Elena Whitmore Foundation under the revised schedule." I nodded. I had funded that trust after Elena died, because grief made me generous and fear made me careless. I wanted Isabella to feel her mother still protecting her. Instead, the trust became a cushion so thick she no longer felt ground. Second, Fifth Avenue apartment, master lease held by Whitmore Residential Holdings. Their sublease can be non-renewed with 30 days notice. You have subsidized the difference between their nominal rent and market rent for 13 years. Issue notice. Third, Caldwell Hartman and Associate. Disclosure to David Caldwell of all client origin records tied to Marcus Harrison. The documentation is clean. Send it. Fourth, vehicle, club, household, and discretionary lifestyle subsidies. Termination notices prepared. Execute. Fifth, major asset transfer into the Elena Whitmore Foundation. Liquid endowment of 200 million. Hampton's property, future remainder interest in Westchester subject to your life estate, and revised estate documents limiting Isabella's inheritance to a controlled, modest distribution contingent on financial counseling and continued employment. He paused. Charles, once the foundation board accepts these assets, Isabella cannot regain them through pressure or apology. This is not a dramatic gesture. It is permanent. Good. James closed the folder partially and removed his glasses. Now I ask as your attorney and your friend. Last night injured you. Are you signing from clarity or from the wound? I looked at the Mont Blanc pen on his desk, the one Elena gave me for our 20th anniversary, which I had brought for this purpose. Both. Injury finally brought me to the room where clarity had been waiting. James accepted that. He placed the pen in front of me. I signed for nearly 40 minutes. Trust dissolution, lease non-renewal, client origin disclosures, foundation transfers, estate revisions, banking notifications, board authorizations. Each signature made a soft, almost ridiculous sound on paper considering the weight it carried. I thought I would feel vengeance. I felt grief being notarized. When the last page was done, James gathered everything with the careful hands of a man handling remains. She will fight, let her, she will cry. She did not last night. He looked up. That answer told him enough. He stood, shook my hand, then covered it with his other hand for one moment. I am sorry, Charles. The sympathy nearly cracked me because it was clean, offered without hunger. I nodded and left before I could embarrass myself by needing it. At Whitmore Development Headquarters, Patricia Vale rose the moment I entered. Patricia had been my executive assistant for 28 years, which meant she knew more truth than many family members and had the grace to treat knowledge as responsibility. She had watched Isabella grow from a girl spinning in the lobby until she made herself dizzy, into a young woman bringing Marcus through our doors like a trophy she expected us to polish. Patricia took one look at my face and did not ask what happened. "Mr. Morrison called," she said. "The documents are in motion. Good, David Caldwell, today. 3 o'clock. In person, apartment management, issue notice. Citizens Bank distributions cease," she wrote quickly, then stopped. "Mr. Whitmore," I looked at her. Her eyes held something carefully contained. Anger, perhaps, or sorrow. "Is it over?" She meant the old indulgence, the soft machinery that had made Isabella's life frictionless. "Yes," I said. "It is over." Patricia nodded once. "Then I will make sure no one mistakes this for a clerical matter." David Caldwell arrived at 3. With the wary expression of a man summoned by a creditor of the soul. He was my age, heavier now, more tired around the eyes, still brilliant, still capable of smelling liability before others saw smoke. Caldwell Hartman existed partly because David had talent, and partly because in 2008, I decided talent deserved oxygen more than predatory lenders deserved another corpse. He sat across from me. "Charles David," I handed him the Marcus file. "Read before speaking." He frowned, but he knew me well enough not to protest. Page by page, he reviewed the accounts Marcus claimed as originated business. Pemberton, Riverside, Metropolitan Museum Advisory, 3 non-profit retainers, a municipal redevelopment introduction, 2 private equity referrals, each documented with emails, call logs, and original introductions from me or entities tied to my office. David's face moved from curiosity to discomfort, then to anger. When he finished, he placed the file on my desk with both hands. If this is accurate, Marcus has not originated significant business in years. It is accurate. Charles, he built a partnership case on these. Yes. David rubbed one hand over his face. Why did you allow it? It was a fair question. Because my daughter loved him, and I confused supporting her marriage with manufacturing his worth. David looked down at the file. If we correct the records, he will not survive review. Then he should not survive review. He will claim retaliation. You will claim accuracy. David studied me. What did he do? I did not describe the leftovers. I did not need to give Marcus that much room in my mouth. He mistook subsidy for power. David nodded slowly. Then I suppose it is time we find out what Marcus Harrison is without it. The first call from Marcus came the next afternoon, earlier than expected, which told me David moved quickly. I was in the Westchester Library, Elena's favorite room, reviewing foundation bylaws when my phone vibrated. Marcus, I let it ring 4 times, long enough for him to feel dependence, then answered. Marcus, his voice came through tight and breathless. Charles, something insane just happened at the firm. David called me in. They are restructuring the partnership track. They are pulling accounts from my portfolio. Accounts I brought in. Did you? Silence. Then anger, because panic in men like Marcus often dresses itself in offense. What is that supposed to mean? It means origination records matter. You did this. I provided accurate information. You sabotaged my career over one dinner. No, Marcus. I withdrew artificial support from a career that could not stand without it. He laughed sharply, but the laugh cracked at the end. Listen, I know last night got heated. Heated. A word for weather. Not assault. Not degradation. Heated. You poured garbage over my head in public. You were being impossible. And now you are proving my point. You are vindictive, unstable, and clearly too emotional to make rational decisions. Isabella is worried about you. There it was. The next tactic. If charm failed, pathologize the old man. Is she? Yes. We both are. You need to undo whatever you told David before this becomes a bigger family problem. I looked toward the garden, where the roses moved in the wind. Marcus, this is already bigger than family. It is now information meeting consequence. You arrogant old bastard. His voice dropped. You think money makes you God? No, I said. But it reveals who kneels. I ended the call. Isabella called that evening. I knew Marcus had called her first because her sweetness sounded hurried, assembled under pressure. Dad, she said, can we talk? We are talking. I mean really talk. About dinner. I was slicing tomatoes in the kitchen. The knife Elena once marked as absurdly expensive until she admitted it cut perfectly. What about dinner? Marcus feels terrible. Does he? He is under enormous stress. Work pressure. He drank too much. Did you drink too much when you agreed with him? She inhaled. Dad, please. Please what? Please do not do this. This, destroy us. I set down the knife. What do you think I am destroying? Marcus's job is in danger. Our apartment manager called. The trust distribution did not come through. Everything is happening at once. Consequences often travel together once invited. Her voice sharpened. You are enjoying this? No, then stop it. No, the simplicity of the word stunned us both. Isabella had rarely heard me refuse without explanation. She had grown up inside my explanations, used them as ladders. Dad, she whispered, you are scaring me. Good, I said, and hated myself for how true it felt. Fear may reach places comfort never did. She began to cry, not loudly but with practiced softness. You are my father. Yes, family is not supposed to do this. I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. Family is not supposed to watch a man be covered in garbage and tell him he deserves it. The line went silent. When she spoke again, she was smaller. I was angry. At what? At everything, at you. At the way you hold on to the past. At the way you make us feel guilty for wanting a future. You wanted my house. We wanted a plan. You wanted my life rearranged around your convenience. You make everything sound ugly. No, Isabella. I am removing the nicer words. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night I sat in Elena's chair in the kitchen, and listened to the house. It had always had sounds, old pipes, wood contracting, branches touching glass. I used to find them comforting, because Elena would identify each one. Kitchen pipe, east gutter, that is the oak again. After she died, the same sounds became accusations. Why is the house empty, Charles? Why did you fill it with payments instead of presents? Why did you make generosity so easy that your daughter never learned gratitude had weight? I had not only been wronged, that was the part Rage liked. The other part, the quieter part, was that I had helped build the conditions of the wrong. I had mistaken protection for love and dependency for connection. Marcus and Isabella were responsible for their cruelty, but I was responsible for the soft world that let them mistake cruelty for consequence-free expression. Both truths could stand in the same room. Neither cancelled the other. Within a week, the life Isabella and Marcus believed was theirs began separating from them in layers. The trust distribution failed to appear. Isabella called Citizens Bank, then James Morrison, then Patricia, then me, receiving only formal answers or silence. The apartment management company delivered the 30-day non-renewal notice through a courier in a navy blazer who would not enter the apartment when Isabella invited him in, which she later described to me as humiliating without yet understanding the irony. Caldwell Hartman removed Marcus from client leadership and requested his resignation before formal review. Club dues, previously routed through a hospitality account tied to one of my entities, came due in full. The car service account closed. Their black card supplementary access stopped. Vendors who had always been paid before sending invoices began asking Isabella directly for payment, and she discovered that many of the conveniences she thought attached to status had actually attached to me. Their world did not collapse theatrically at first. It became inconvenient, then embarrassing, then frightening. Collapse often begins as administration. The aftermath inside their apartment was reported to me in fragments, first through formal channels, then through Isabella's own shaken admissions. On the morning the trust distribution failed, Isabella apparently assumed a banking error. She called her private banker with irritation, not fear. By noon, irritation had become confusion. By 3, when the banker forwarded the termination notice from James's office, confusion became panic. Marcus came home early from Caldwell Hartman after David stripped his accounts and told him the firm would welcome his resignation as a dignified resolution. Dignified resolution is legal language for leave before we make the file uglier. He found Isabella in the living room surrounded by papers, the Fifth Avenue skyline behind her, the apartment already less hers though the furniture had not moved. They argued for 4 hours. Marcus insisted I was bluffing. Isabella said I did not bluff. Marcus said she should call my doctors, my staff, anyone who could confirm I had been declining. Isabella told him no doctor would sign that. Marcus shouted that everyone had a price. She shouted back that he did not even have one anymore, because David had just priced him at 0. That was when he threw the first glass, not Elena's vase yet, a wine glass. It shattered against the kitchen wall. Their downstairs neighbor complained. Marcus sent the doorman down with cash they no longer had. The next day, Marcus tried to enter Caldwell Hartman and found his access card deactivated. He called David 23 times. David did not answer. He called me 11 times. I answered none. He emailed threats from his personal account, alleging tortious interference, defamation, elder instability, and family coercion in one incoherent message that James later described as a useful exhibit of desperation. Isabella, meanwhile, sat with the apartment notice on her lap and stared at the clause explaining that their occupancy had always been contingent on the underlying master lease. She told me later that she read it 5 times because the words refused to become real. I kept thinking there must be another page, she said. Something that said except if this is your life. There was no such page. Isabella came to my house 9 days after Le Bernardin. I watched her from the living room window as she stepped out of a rideshare instead of her usual car service. She wore a cream coat, but it was unbuttoned, and her hair, usually flawless, had escaped its shape in small strands around her face. She rang the bell once, waited, rang again. I let the seconds pass because I needed, for my own sake, to feel the difference between entrance and permission. When I opened the door, she held a thick envelope against her chest. Her eyes were red, though she had repaired her makeup in the car. "Dad, Isabella, may I come in?" That question, small as it was, marked the first tremor of reality. Yes, she stepped inside and looked around the foyer, as if the house had become less familiar in the days since losing claim to it. Her gaze caught on Alina's framed photograph near the staircase. She looked away quickly. We sat in the kitchen because she asked to. Like when I was little, she said, attempting a fragile smile. I did not return it. She placed the envelope between us and removed printouts. Property records, corporate filings, old articles, foundation documents, shell company diagrams she had likely paid someone to assemble quickly. I spent the week researching you. That is a strange sentence from a daughter. She flinched. I know. Her fingers moved over the papers. Whitmore Development, Coleman Properties, Sandpiper Residential, West 40 Holdings, the foundation, Caldwell Hartman's bailout, the apartment. Dad, you are not comfortable. You are not just wealthy. You are. She stopped because the numbers had exceeded her vocabulary of accusation. I am what? Powerful, she said. It sounded like an indictment. And you hid it from me. I did not hide who I was. I hid the size of what you could take. Her face twisted. That is cruel, perhaps. I let the word stand because I was finished defending every imperfect choice simply because hers had been worse. But it also told me something. You tested me. Life tested you. I kept the score private until you made the result public. She cried then, but not fully. She fought it because humiliation had begun teaching her that tears did not purchase as much outside my old indulgence. I am sorry, she said. For what, Dad? No. Name it. Her mouth opened, then closed. I am sorry Marcus poured food on you. That is what Marcus did. What did you do? She looked down. I said he was right. And I said you needed to learn your place. Her voice broke on the last word. Why? She covered her face. Because I was angry. Anger is not an answer. Because I thought you were holding us back. From what? She dropped her hands. From the life we were supposed to have. There it was. Honest, ugly, useful. The life funded by moving me out of mine. I did not think of it that way. That is the problem. She bowed her head. Marcus said we had to be firm. He said you would never make rational decisions because you were living in Mom's ghost. My hand tightened under the table. Did you believe him? Sometimes. And now I do not know what I believe. That was the first answer I trusted. I told her the trust was gone. I told her the apartment was gone. I told her Marcus's career would stand or fall without my hidden scaffolding. And from what David Caldwell had seen, it was already falling. I told her the foundation had accepted the transfer, and her inheritance was no longer what she had imagined. She stared at me, breath shallow. That was supposed to be mine. No, you assumed it would be yours. I am your only child. Yes, then how can you give it away? Because wealth that becomes entitlement has already been stolen from its purpose. She pressed both hands flat on the table as if the room were moving. What am I supposed to do? Live, she laughed once bitterly. On what? A salary. I have never had a real job. The confession slipped out before pride could stop it. She looked horrified by herself. I do not know how to do this. I looked at my daughter, 36 years old, educated beyond necessity, socially fluent, expensively dressed, and terrified by ordinary survival. In that moment, my anger made room for shame. Not mercy yet. Shame. I had done this too. I had paid for every landing before she learned falling had lessons. Then you will learn. Will you help me? The question came with immediate hope. Not with money, the hope dimmed. Advice, if you ask for advice and not rescue. I do not know the difference yet. That honesty again. Small but real. Then learning the difference is your first work. For months, her life became smaller and more exposed. Marcus unraveled badly. Without partnership prospects, without accounts, without my invisible sponsorship. He turned mean in ways Isabella had once mistaken for strength when aimed at others. He blamed her, then May, then David, then an economic climate that had somehow not prevented better men from remaining employed. He broke Alina's crystal vase during an argument, and when Isabella called me afterward, voice hollow, she did not ask for money. She said he smashed Mom's vase. I closed my eyes. The vase had been blue and clear, bought in Prague on a trip where Alina, already tired though we did not yet know why, held it up to the window and said it looked like trapped rain. Did you stop him? I asked. No, why not? I was afraid. Of him, silence. Of what would happen after. That too, I understood more than I wanted to. Delayed resistance is not always cowardice. Sometimes it is the body calculating what the mind cannot bear to total. Marcus left 2 weeks later, first to a hotel, then to Ohio, where his parents still believed Manhattan had corrupted their brilliant son rather than revealed him. He filed for divorce eventually, claiming emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and interference by me. His filings were theatrical and legally weak. Isabella signed after her attorney advised that there was little dignity in contesting a man who had already publicly proven the central point. She moved to Queens. The apartment was small, with a radiator that clanged and a kitchen too narrow for two people to pass without turning sideways. The first night there, she called me at midnight. The stove is making a clicking sound. Did you turn the knob off fully? I think so. Check. I heard movement, then a small embarrassed laugh. It stopped. Good. I am sorry. For the stove. For being someone who does not know how stoves work. I sat in my Westchester study looking at Elena's photograph. Learn one thing at a time. She ruined rice 3 times before getting it right. She learned the subway by taking the wrong train twice and crying once in a station bathroom because nobody cared that she was lost. She learned grocery prices. She learned landlords do not soften because your father used to own buildings. She learned that jobs arranged without family connections require resumes, interviews, rejection, and humility. She found work at a small Brooklyn arts program serving children who had lost parents or homes or both. The salary would not have paid for one of her old dresses. She accepted it anyway. At first, she called often, and I had to learn a new discipline. Answering did not mean rescuing. Listening did not mean paying. Once she called from a laundromat because a machine took her quarters, and she did not know whether to confront the attendant. I walked her through it, then sat afterward with my head in my hands, sick with the knowledge that my daughter could analyze gala seating politics but not negotiate a broken washing machine. My failure had worn silk for years. Now it wore fluorescent laundromat lighting. She began therapy with Dr. Catherine Walsh, who specialized, Isabella said awkwardly, in people who grew up with money and became useless in practical ways. I almost laughed. She did not. She says I confuse being served with being loved. Do you? I used to, and now I am trying not to. That became the rhythm of our conversations. No absolution. No dramatic reconciliation. A series of attempts not to become the worst version of what comfort had made. The Elena Whitmore Foundation opened its expanded program the following spring. Its mission was simple: education, housing stability, and life skills support for children and young adults who had lost parents or primary caregivers. I named it for Elena because the best part of her had always been practical mercy. She did not simply feel sorry. She showed up with soup, forms, phone numbers, a ride, a plan. The Hamptons property became a summer retreat for scholarship families. 2 Manhattan holdings generated operating income. The liquid endowment ensured the foundation would survive my moods and outlive my body. Isabella asked to volunteer. I said no first, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I did not trust her motives or mine. A month later, she asked again, more carefully. I will do whatever Sarah needs. Filing, chairs, cleaning. I do not need a title. That answer sounded less like the daughter from Bernardin. I allowed Sarah Williams, the foundation director, to decide. Sarah put her on tutoring support and supply inventory. No public-facing role. No gala committee. No donor relations. Isabella accepted. Watching her work was harder than cutting her off. At a ceremony for scholarship recipients, she stood near the back in a plain navy dress, holding a clipboard, directing families to tables. Not pearls, not silk, not center stage. A 17-year-old named Lucia Alvarez received a scholarship to Columbia and clutched the letter with both hands, crying so hard her foster mother cried too. Isabella stepped toward them instinctively, then stopped herself, letting Sarah embrace them first. That restraint mattered. Later, I saw Isabella kneeling beside a boy whose shoelace had broken, tying it with a piece of ribbon from a gift bag. He was 9. His mother had died the previous winter. He looked at Isabella with complete trust, because children do that before life teaches them accounts. She smiled at him, and for 1 second, I saw the girl she had been before comfort hardened into entitlement. It hurt more than anger. Anger creates distance. Love with evidence of damage brings you close enough to see the fracture. After the ceremony, we walked outside into a cool evening. Manhattan traffic moved beyond the curb, restless and indifferent. Isabella hugged her clipboard against her chest. Do you think Mom would hate me? She asked. The question landed without warning. No, she closed her eyes. Would she be ashamed? I looked at my daughter, at the woman she had become and was becoming, both visible at once. Yes, she nodded as if she deserved the blow. I continued, she would also sit with you while you tried to become better. Elena believed shame should be a doorway, not a house. Isabella began to cry, but quietly, with no performance. And you, I am not your mother. I know, I am still angry. I know, I still see that night. She whispered, so do I. We stood there a long time. I wanted to reach for her. I did not. She did not ask me to. Years of indulgence do not reverse in months, nor does cruelty dissolve because someone learns to budget. There were setbacks. Isabella once called furious because a foundation board member corrected her in front of staff. She spoke to me like I was incompetent. Were you? That is not the point. It may be exactly the point. She hung up on me. The next day she called back and admitted she had mishandled a vendor order and blamed unclear instructions. Another time she asked whether the estate plan was truly final. I said yes. She went quiet for nearly a week. When she returned, she said, I hated you for saying that. I assumed. I still hate it. Good. Honesty is better than flattery. I do not want your money to be the reason I behave. Then make sure it is not. These were not warm conversations. They were work. Some relationships, after damage, are not restored so much as rebuilt into something less beautiful but more load-bearing. 1 year after Le Bernardin, I received a box from Isabella. Inside was Eleanor's pearl necklace. No note at first, only the strand in its velvet case, luminous and quiet. I called her. Why did you send these? She breathed shakily. Because I wore them that night. I looked at the pearls, remembering them at Isabella's throat while leftovers slid down my face. Yes, I do not deserve them. Perhaps not right now. Will I ever? That is not for me to decide alone. She was silent. I thought you would tell me to keep them. I know. I am trying not to expect softness just because I am sorry. I closed the case. That may be the first thing you have said today that would make your mother proud. She cried then. I let her. When the call ended, I placed the pearls in my safe. Not as punishment, not as inheritance, but as an unfinished sentence. I still keep the ruined charcoal suit. It hangs in a sealed garment bag, in a storage closet behind winter coats I rarely wear. The cleaners tried 3 times. The visible stains faded. The smell mostly left. But when I unzip the bag, there remains, or I imagine there remains, the faint ghost of lemon butter and old wine. I keep it because memory weakens when life improves. And I do not trust improvement alone. Comfort is seductive. Apologies can become warm. Children can become tender again. A father can begin mistaking progress for restoration, and restoration for erasure. The suit prevents that. It reminds me that love without boundary becomes appetite. It reminds me that dignity surrendered to keep peace does not return automatically, just because the person who took it begins to understand loss. You have to guard it even from your own mercy. On the 2nd anniversary, Isabella and I had dinner at a small diner halfway between Queens and Westchester. She chose it because it was quiet and the pancakes were good. She had become fond of pancakes after I told her Eleanor used to make them when Isabella was small, before private schools and committees and Marcus, and all the polished rooms where she learned to confuse being admired with being loved. We sat in a vinyl booth under lighting that forgave no one. Isabella wore a simple sweater. Her hair was pulled back. No jewelry except small silver studs. She looked older than 38. She looked more real. Lucia got into Columbia's summer research program, she said, smiling. She called me screaming from the sidewalk. Good, Nathan is still impossible. Brilliant but impossible. That sounds familiar. She looked at me. Are you saying I was impossible? I am saying I survived your adolescence. She almost smiled. Then her face changed. Dad, I waited. I know I cannot undo what happened. I know saying sorry does not pay for it. She pressed her napkin between both hands. But I need you to know that I do not think of that night as the night you ruined my life anymore. What do you think of it as? Her eyes filled, but she held steady. The night I saw what I had become because you finally stopped protecting me from the sight. I looked out the window at passing cars. Rain moved down the glass in thin lines. That is a heavy thing to carry. It should be. Do not let it become theater. I am trying not to. The waitress brought coffee. We let the interruption pass. When Isabella picked up her cup, her hands were steady. The ending people want is simple. They want me to say Isabella became humble. The foundation healed us, Marcus vanished, Eleanor's pearls returned, and I learned that tough love saves families. That is not the ending. Marcus did vanish from our daily lives, but damage does not vanish with the person who performed it. Isabella became more useful, more honest, sometimes kinder, but humility earned through collapse has sharp edges and bad days. The foundation helped many children, but no amount of good done in Alina's name brought Alina back to tell me whether I had waited too long or acted too harshly. The pearls remain in my safe. The Westchester house remains mine while I live, and after me it belongs to the foundation. Isabella will inherit enough for security, structured enough to prevent old dependencies from regrowing. She knows this. Sometimes I see pain cross her face when estate topics arise. Sometimes I see relief. Perhaps both are appropriate. There is no clean justice in a father cutting off his only child. There is justice perhaps, but not clean. It stains everyone. I survived the night at Bernardin. I survived the public humiliation, the silence of strangers, the betrayal in my daughter's eyes. Isabella survived the loss of money, status, husband, apartment, illusion, and the version of herself that believed love was measured by how long the world kept serving her. We are both alive. We are both changed. That is not the same as healed. Sometimes, late at night, I still walk through the Westchester house and hear Isabella as a child. Her fate on the stairs, her laughter in the kitchen, her voice calling Daddy from the garden. Memory is cruel because it does not respect chronology. It gives you the child and the woman at the same table. It gives you the thunderstorm and Bernardin. It gives you Alina fastening pearls around a young bride's neck, and the same pearls shining while that daughter tells you humiliation is deserved. I have learned not to argue with memory. I let it enter. I let it sit. I do not let it make decisions. On the anniversary of the 3rd year, Isabella texted instead of calling. Dad, I know what today is. I am sorry because I hurt you when you were still trying to love me. I am not asking you to say anything back. I just wanted to say it clearly. I read the message at my kitchen table. Outside, the hydrangeas had begun to droop again in the heat, as they had on the day she invited me to dinner. The old painted clock above the pantry ticked with its chipped colors. I placed the phone face down and finished my coffee before answering. That may sound cold. It was discipline. It was the difference between being moved and being pulled. Finally, I wrote, I received your message. Thank you for saying it clearly. She responded with a single heart, then nothing else. The restraint was a gift. I accepted it. That evening, I unlocked the storage closet and unzipped the garment bag. The suit hung there, cleaned but not clean, restored but not whole, like many things in my life. I touched the lapel where the worst stain had been. Fabric remembers differently than skin. Skin keeps sensation. Fabric keeps evidence. I zipped the bag again and stood in the dark closet for longer than necessary. Then I went downstairs, turned on the porch light, and sat in Alina's chair by the kitchen window. The house was quiet, but not empty in the same way it had been before. Somewhere in Queens, Isabella was probably preparing for another foundation workshop, teaching young people how to read leases, budget groceries, ask for help without surrendering pride, and survive the terror of becoming responsible for themselves. Somewhere far away, Marcus was likely still telling a version of the story in which I destroyed him. Let him. Men like Marcus cannot survive a mirror, so they build theaters. I no longer buy tickets. If there is any lesson in what happened, it is not that revenge heals or that money should be used as a weapon, though money becomes one the moment love is replaced by entitlement. It is not that children who fail you should be discarded, nor that parents should keep giving until nothing remains of them but usefulness. The lesson is colder and less comforting. Love without boundary becomes a feeding place. Generosity without truth becomes training for contempt. And dignity, once surrendered in the name of peace, does not come back because the people who took it apologize. You choose it back. You choose it awkwardly, painfully, sometimes too late to save what you wanted most. You choose it while still loving the person who made the choice necessary. That is the brutal part no one puts in speeches. I am still Charles Whitmore. I am still Isabella's father. I still miss Alina every day. I still sometimes wake before dawn with the taste of old sauce in my memory, and the sound of Marcus saying that is what you deserve. I still sometimes see my daughter's face across that table and feel the old room go silent around me. But I also see her kneeling beside a child with a broken shoelace. I see her reading a lace aloud to scholarship students. I see her standing in my kitchen, naming what she did without hiding inside softer words. Both images are true. Neither erases the other. The world wants endings because endings make pain useful. Life gives continuations. Mine continues in a house that is quieter than it used to be, with a foundation that carries my wife's name, a daughter I love from a safer distance, a ruined suit in storage, and a memory that no longer controls every room but still owns a key. I survived. Isabella survived. The family survived in a smaller, colder, more honest form. There is no music over that, no warm embrace under chandeliers, no final forgiveness that makes the audience feel clean. There is only the long work after the table goes silent, after the food dries, after the call is made, after the money stops, after the tears no longer purchase rescue. There is only a father sitting alone in the kitchen he once shared with his wife, listening to the old clock his daughter painted as a child, understanding at last that time does not heal everything. Sometimes time only teaches you how to carry what never heals without letting it decide the rest of your life.